Well, a good thing, in the last few days we looked at some of the better performing specs in the beta, as well as looking a couple of days ago at the results of the raid testing, because what happened in this reset is a large list of balance tuning in the beta of The War Within. So now we get to see exactly Blizzard's reaction towards the performance of several specs so far in the beta. Now, the first reaction Blizzard had was for Death Knight, in particular Unholy, and in particular the hero talent 3, Sun Lane, which is what gets nerfed. We mentioned Unholy doing quite well in the results of the beta, partially thanks to this hero talent giving them lots of things, which are now getting somewhat nerfed. The first nerf is Visceral Regeneration getting changed. This was one of the main culprits, having a chance to give you back a rune, to give you back more resources. Now it just gives you strength for a few seconds. The other one was the large damage done by Affliction of Sorrow. We looked at the overall damage of an Unholy DK playing this talent tree, and the results were quite high in damage. Now this has been cut from this passive doing 200% of the remaining damage of the consumed dot to only 100% of the remaining damage. So that is a particularly meaningful nerf, which will be even more meaningful in AoE, not even in single target. No particular changes to the rest of the DK specs, and now we move over to Demon Hunter. Because, of course, we have the main talk of the day, which doesn't really leave much room for explanation. Vengeance Demon Hunter's Illuminated Sigils now grants an additional charge only to Sigil of Flame instead of all Sigils, as well as reducing the cooldown of Sigil of Flame. It's funny because back when we made a video complaining about this talent, I mentioned the most logical nerf was to simply make this talent give an extra charge to the least impactful of the sigils, which was Sigil of Flame. Technically also Elysian Decree would have been fine having a second charge, since it's not that major. The real problem of this talent was giving you a second charge of your Fear AoE Sigil, your Chain AoE Sigil, and of course your Silence AoE Sigil. And that's what this change is going to do to Vengeance, which is a very necessary nerf to make them more in line with the rest of the tanks in terms of the crowd control they have available. There has been also a set of changes to the Aldrachi Havoc hero talent tree, mostly for Havoc Demon Hunter. You know, Havoc was getting in kind of a tight position when it came to their rotation. It's funny that we are now in a world where we are pointing out the rotation of Havoc being possibly the more complicated amongst the DPS specs compared to what we have been used to when it comes to the Havoc Demon Hunter playstyle. These talents are reworking the Aldrachi River, like requiring 6 Soul Fragments to proc your next glaive instead of 3, so not happening nearly as often. You now have a clear choice on when you want to AoE or single target, because Fury of the Aldrachi, if you use Blade Dance after Chaos Strike, Blade Dance casts 6 additional slashes, which is better in AoE, whereas if you're in single target and you cast Chaos Strike after Blade Dance, when you are consuming the buffs that River's Glaive give you, you gain extra damage on a single target. It is interesting that now Havoc has practically the largest damage increase possible of any DPS. You can get 30% more damage increase from River's Mark. You're also going to be getting Thrill of the Fight, which can give you 30% more damage and healing for 10 seconds. You're already playing, for example, with Inertia, giving you 18% more damage done for 5 seconds, and your burst window includes Essence Break, which makes your Chaos Strike and Blade Dance deal 80% more damage for 4 seconds. So you have very tight windows in your damage rotation already, and this hero talent is further empowering these windows. Now it's just slightly more smooth and simple to execute than it was before. Now Druid gets pretty much passed over. There is one positive thing to mention about Evoker, even though they're not getting many changes, is the change to Temporal Burst, one of the passive talents in Chrono Warden for augmentation and preservation. Previously, this talent used to give you a stacking increase in haste, cooldown reduction and movement speed, starting at 1% and then increasing by 1% per second over 40 seconds. We said this was bad because if you wanted to line up Temporal Burst with your other cooldowns, you would have gotten to 20+% haste after 20 seconds that you use your cooldowns, which is not very useful. What makes this useful is the change that now makes Temporal Burst increase all of these things by 30% immediately and then decaying by 1% per second. So now it's good because you get to use Temporal Burst at the beginning of your burst rotation, your burst window of augmentation or preservation, and immediately get the 30% haste, which is a good QoL. Now for Hunter, perhaps the least of the surprising changes was the nerf to Sentinel. What is surprising about the nerf to Sentinel is that it's not enough, because the nerf is 30% damage to Symphonic Arsenal, which is still not the main damage source of the hero talent tree in general. Even the target cap from 6 to 5 is still not major compared to the overall damage Sentinel is doing. They are though buffing overall Beast Mastery. When we looked at the results of the DPS in the raid, for example, marksmanship was quite ahead of Beast Mastery, so Blizzard had the option: should we nerf marksmanship to be at the level of Beast Mastery, or should we try to buff Beast Mastery to be at the level of marksmanship? The answer is to buff Beast Mastery a little bit more. Besides fixing a few of the bugs in the beta, both Kill Command and Dire Beast have been buffed for Beast Mastery. But the biggest change, yes, that's true, the biggest change for Hunters this week is to Survival, which receives a large number of changes and QoL improvements to their rotation. Now, at first, it seems kind of annoying, because as you read, now Wildfire Bomb costs focus, now Explosive Experts reduces the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb by 2 seconds instead of 4. Wildfire Infusion reduces the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb by 1 second instead of 2, and Grenade Juggler makes Explosive Shot reduce the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb by 2 seconds instead of 4. So, for now, the quality of life seems to simply have Wildfire Bomb available less often than it has been so far. The explanation from Blizzard is that this is an attempt at smoothing out Survival's rotation, allowing you to continue to maintain a set spell priority without being swarmed by procs and by free casts or extra casts of Wildfire Bombs way too often. So they are attempting to slow down the amount of times you have Wildfire Bomb available. In return, they are splashing out several buffs to your Tip of the Spear passive. Now you have an easier way to continue to generate these Tip of the Spear stacks, and also you have buffs to some of your abilities, including, more importantly, Flanking Strike, which now hits 3 targets, makes Kill Command hits 3 targets. The base damage of Flanking Strike is increased by 40%. All of this in an attempt to make the rotation of Survival less completely dependent on Wildfire Bomb. Now, this is an interesting one, because we mentioned Fire Mage being by far the highest damage spec in the beta, as if it was a surprise that a Mage spec is OP. One of the main culprits was the Sun Fury hero talent tree, which, though, does not get nerfed. The main change is that now Codex of the Sunstriders has been slightly redesigned. Now, your Arcane Phoenix, instead of casting Greater Pyroblast when you summon it, is gonna be slowly consuming your Spellfire orbs to give you stacking damage, which is a slight positive and still makes the hero talent a strong pick. The good part about this change is that it's the spec itself that is nerfed. Fire. Fire has the damage of Living Bomb reduced by 30%, the Sparkling Cinders damage is reduced, Phoenix Flames damage is reduced, and Pyroblast damage is reduced. This is good, because this could have been one of those worrying moments where a spec is doing very good because of the power of the hero talent, so Blizzard just nerfs the hero talent instead, which might have, for example, hurt the other spec that wanted to play with that hero talent. Instead, now it's the spec itself, Fire, that receives the nerf. Meanwhile, talking about Mage, Arcane, which was the weakest performer in the beta so far, you have Arcane Blast, Arcane Barrage, as well as Arcane Missiles, all buffed, which is most of your damage. You also have a few attempts at buffing Magi's Spark as a talent option, which is also now no longer a choice node with improved Touch of the Magi, so you can now pick both of them. Another positive thing with the change to hero talents was the change to Frost, which had its tier set changed to do more damage with Ice Lance and passive extra damage from your 4-piece. The explanation from Blizzard being the older tier set was benefiting from the Spellslinger hero talent too much compared to Frostfire. So we are changing the tier set so that it doesn't synergize nearly as much with Spellslinger. So now it might be more even in the choice between the two hero talents. Now, surprisingly, despite the very good performance of Mistweaver in the beta, it does not get nerfed or touched in any way. We skip directly to Holy Paladin. Now, despite many of the complaints on the way Holy Paladin works or in the way their hero talent tree is shaped, they actually get a massive nerf. And this time though, since we just talked about not nerfing the hero talent, this one is a nerf straight to the hero talent. However, if you played in the beta and you tried this thing out, you would understand why. The Don't Light hero talent 3 for Paladin, Holy Paladin in particular, was just way too strong. There was no clear way in attempting to nerf the spec itself, because the hero talent was just too effective. So Sun's Avatar healing has been nerfed by 40%, Dawn Light healing has been nerfed by 20%. Way more importantly, the Sun's Avatar activation when you use wings now puts 1 Dawn Light on target instead of 4 Dawn Lights, which was part of the big burst of healing allowed to Holy Paladin because of the hero talent. Second Sunrise can no longer activate Divine Purpose, so all of this was an attempt to nerf the power of this hero talent, which is understandable in this case because of how powerful it was. Now, there is still one slight QoL buff to Holy, because now Divine Favor has been redesigned and put right below its parent talent, which is the choice node between Barrier of Fate and Holy Prism. Very good, it saves you 1 GCD, it saves you 1 button and 1 ability on your bars, and now it activates by itself whenever you use one of these 2 abilities. Now Priest only receives 1 change, a bit unfortunate, let's just say pending further changes, because this one nerfs Void Blast by 25%. So the problem with this was more centered around Discipline than it was around Shadow Priest, because Discipline was basically ignoring other abilities and just keep spamming Void Blast because of the damage it did. It was even outdoing Penance as an ability for Discipline, so it was kind of dumb to make it work that way. The problem now is a different one. It's the fact that Discipline has been the worst performer, or one of the 2 worst performers in terms of healing in the beta. Understandable, of course, partially since Discipline requires a lot of setup and understanding of the encounter for you to heal properly. But one of the other problems right now is that outside of your burst window, your atonement window, with a big ramp, your healing is far too low. So now you are nerfing Void Blast, which was used in these big ramps of healing, but now the spec itself is even weaker. There has been no compensation for now after nerfing this talent, in particular, as mentioned, for Discipline, not nearly as much for Shadow Priest. If you wanted to have an idea of how weak Deathstalker Hero Talent 3 was for Rogue, just look at the size of the buffs given to this hero talent in this last set of tuning. They are doubling the damage of Deathstalker's Mark, they are doubling the damage of Hunt Them Down, doubling the damage of Flensing Knives, in a desperate attempt on making this hero talent not completely terrible. However, we now are in the class which we mentioned was the overall best performer in the beta, which is Warlock. So it shouldn't be a surprise to know that we have nerfs to talk about, because first is to Diabolist for the 2 special abilities which transform your default ones. In this case it's Infernal Bolt for Shadow Bolt or Incinerate, now has twice as much of a cast time, 2 seconds long instead of 1, and now the other one, Ruination, which would transform Hand of Gul'dan or Chaos Bolt, now has a target cap of 8 enemies, and then it will do reduced damage for Diabolist. Diabolist wasn't particularly OP, it wasn't, in need of massive nerfs. Where we have more nerfs, and this one is much more impactful for destruction, is Hellcaller. So we mentioned this talent quite in detail when we talked about Warlocks, and besides the power of the damage of Wither, the extra damage of Wither thanks to Blackened Soul and giving you a properly good 1-minute cooldown, the bigger issue, particularly for Destro, was Seeds of the Demise. Because when Blackened Soul was doing damage, when the extra damage of Wither was doing damage, you had a chance to gain Ritual of Ruin, which would then spawn an Overfiend. The newly changed spawn, no longer your Purple Infernal, instead this Chaos Bolt, single target spamming demon. Well, now this is deleted. It's deleted because now instead for Destro you gain Flashpoint. So you gain stacking haste, you gain upwards of 6% haste. Now, in a vacuum, if you weren't going to lose this for this buff, this is kind of cool, because it saves you a talent point, right? You don't have to take this anymore, which is completely irrelevant in single target, because you had to pass through here to get to reverse entropy, but in AoE it can be decent because you can now spec into incinerate splash AoE damage without having to go through here because you get this for free. But if you then consider that to get this talent you have to lose extra free spawns of your Overfiend, then it's a pretty big nerf for Destruction, in particular for the Hellcaller version of Destruction. As I said, Destruction, because Affliction doesn't actually get affected by this, their Seas of their Demise still gives them Tormented Crescendo. So, still gives them free cast, instacast, Malefic Raptures. This has not been changed for the Affliction version of Hellcaller. As for Affliction itself, there has also been a pretty interesting change in their talents, in particular, Death Embrace. It's an interesting change because this one now gives you even stronger execute potential, because now the damage increase on targets below 35% HP instead of 20 is increased by 10% instead of 5. So now this is a more viable talent to take. You know, right now, most of the builds, at least in the beta, are focusing around the Tormented Crescendo side on single target or even AoE, as well as down the Soul Rot line, and they only go here to path through here to get to Oblivion. So this talent point is kind of hard to get, but now, with this extra buff, especially in execute phases for single target bosses, it might actually be much more worth taking for Affliction. There has also been a pretty good quality of life change to Demonology, at least in an attempt to make this more appealing to take, which is going back, like one of your older tier sets, to give you a passive Doom. No longer having to micromanage this one as a button that you actually have to press. We are back down to automatically applying Doom to enemies when Demon Bolt is used while consuming a demonic core. So every time you consume a demonic core, you automatically apply Doom to an enemy, and also the explosion time of Doom, 20 seconds, is reduced by 2 every time you consume another demonic core. And this can be made even stronger by a new talent, which makes the cooldown reduction become 4 seconds per demonic core, and then the further buff that when Doom expires, you have a chance to summon a Doom Guard to do AoE damage. So you can have this cycle, for example, in Mythic Plus, where you gain a demonic core at the end of a pack, you save it for the beginning of the new one, you open up with the free cast Demonic Bolt to gain a free Doom, then you use Power Siphon to get 2 free charges of Demonic Bolt, you instacast them on 2 different enemies, because you're still consuming 2 demonic cores, you are getting 2 and 2 second cooldown reduction on the Doom explosion, so that's 8 seconds cooldown reduction. So now you have 3 different Doom, 1 exploding in 20 seconds, 2 exploding in 12 seconds, and if you get any other procs of demonic core, you get to shorten them even more, and then presumably if the Mythic Plus key is high enough, they will get to explode with the enemies still alive and spawn the Doom Guards doing more AoE damage. So maybe now with these changes and this talent to support Doom, it might even be a non-complete joke of a talent for demo. The last of the changes for Warlock is to the Destro talent tree, which is pretty funny because you have gotten about 10 different talents moved around in the tree, which is funny because when you log into the beta, you would expect to see your talent trees, reset, or at least partially, because too many things have changed. Actually, they didn't. Even while swapping all of these things around, every single talent you were taking before is still takeable in the same way, just moved around. The main takes of all this moving around is that now Blizzard acknowledge that maybe some players don't want to play with Dimensional Rift, so they gave up trying to keep Dimensional Rift in the middle of your talent tree, and instead they just threw it in the bottom right. They did give it a couple of extra or improved talents to make it stronger, but the good thing is that now is on the side. So now you can choose to just completely ignore it if you don't want to use it, and you would rather go and talent into something else. That is the quality of life change for the talent tree of Destruction. The last of the small changes goes to Warrior, in particular arms, because now Blade Master's Torment has been redesigned. This is an interesting one because if you go to Warrior, you will see that they all have this talent available. For protection, when you activate Avatar, you gain Shield Wall at a reduced effectiveness. When you go to Fury Warrior and you activate Avatar, you gain Recklessness at a reduced effectiveness. For arms, when you activated Avatar, you used to gain Blade Storm. Instead, now you cast Sweeping Strikes, and while Avatar is active, the cooldown of Cleave is reduced. So the TLDR on Blizzard explanation is that Arms Warrior, especially playing with Slayer, is turning into a Beyblade. They are practically half the time spinning around, and this talent wasn't helping, putting them even more into Blade Storm, mostly thanks to Unrelenting Onslaught, giving you a much reduced CDR of Blade Storm. So instead now they still give you AoE functionalities by giving you free Sweeping Strikes plus Cleave, just not put you into Blade Storm with this talent as well. That is the main change given to Arms and also to Warrior as a whole, since the other two specs have not been getting much. So, with this entire recap done with, of course the question is, where is Shaman? Yeah, that's the main question that players will have after seeing yet another round of tuning with yet another missing point for the Shaman changes. Last time we looked at the talents in the early introduction of the beta, we were like, don't worry, Blizzard just reworked Hunter and Shaman is next. Shaman gets some juicy changes next. However, now is next, and in this next we have gotten no changes to Shaman, not even a tiny mention, not even a footnote saying, well, don't worry guys, Shaman changes are in the works and they are planned to come out in 1 or 2 weeks or something. We haven't even gotten that. Dire times for now for any of the players hoping for some of the Shaman changes, but luckily for me, I did order a few months ago some high quality reserves, 98% purity of Hopium, so I'm still on the line of Shaman will get its mini rework sometime soon in the beta. But for now, these have been all of the changes down in this latest version of the beta of the War Within. Some were positive, some were not so much. Next weekend, not this weekend, we will have even further raid testing. So for example, we'll get to be able to see even more of the results of these sets of tuning. But for now, on this Wednesday, it is time to leave each other once more. Thanks, as usual, to everyone who has been supporting, including everyone who is doing so for free, by, for example, liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, it went as long as expected. I thought I could shrink it down to 20 minutes, but yeah, I have some problems with being short.